The future of outsourcing, we believe, is digital. Outsourcing providers will provide faster, better, smarter, and cheaper services leveraging digital technology. Functions currently performed by people will increasingly be automated. And the idea that I'd like to leave with you today is that this is a fundamental change in outsourcing. It's a new type of outsourcing and requires fundamentally different contract terms. And to talk about that, I think the thing to do is to start with where outsourcing has been. A good way to look at the future is to look at the past. And the origin story for outsourcing is that sometime around late 50s, early 60s, IBM had a very successful launch of the IBM Series 360 mainframe computer. And people built beautiful data centers. And legend has it that a plucky, hard-driving young salesman at IBM, Ross Perot, said, he said to his bosses at IBM, I think we could make some good money by running these data centers for the clients. And the people at IBM, according to legend, absolutely scoffed. They said, seriously, Ross, no one is going to turn over responsibility for a traditionally internal mission-critical function just to save 10 to 30% on a back office cost. So Ross goes off and, as legend has it, forms Electronic Data Services, and EDS becomes the start of the onshore outsourcing industry. Now, the core promise in onshore outsourcing was that the provider would continue to do what the internal team had done before. They continue the custom service that was done internally. Years go by, and shortly before our first conference, there's a dramatic drop in the cost of global telecommunications. And that we're talking $10 a minute to 10 cents a minute kind of drop. And as a result of that, many plucky entrepreneurs in other countries said, I think I could sell services to the first world from offshore destinations. And they did that with something called offshore outsourcing. In our first few conferences, for those of you who were in the room for those, you'll remember that we were talking about offshore and onshore, and that offshore was fundamentally different. The people were in a different country with different culture, different laws. The ability to walk down the hall and find them was just not there anymore. They weren't even a short plane ride away. It was fundamentally different, and it was a new lane on the outsourcing highway. The core promise on this new lane of the outsourcing highway was not, we'll continue to do what you did as well as you did it, but instead it was, we'll follow your policy and procedures manuals and use procedures approved by you. Now, more recently, we've seen some really exciting technology. Finally, after 20, 30 years of development, people figured out how to do grid computing, linking tens, hundreds, thousands, even tens of thousands of computers to work together. And at the same time, virtualization started to work. And virtualization allowed people to run applications on sort of a cloud of computing devices. And a new lane opened up on the outsourcing highway, which we've called cloud. In cloud, the services are standardized and automated. And you get tremendous benefits from that. The price keeps going down because of Moore's law and increases in the power of software and so forth. And we needed a fundamentally different set of contract terms. The core promise here is not that the services will be done the way the customer did it, or that the services will be done by methods approved by the customer. It's the core promise is that the service will be reasonably available to do what it does. So, each new lane on the outsourcing highway has started the same way. There's been some major technology shift. Then, some entrepreneur who you might never have heard about before comes up with a great new set of ideas on how to save 10 to 30%, and then it becomes widely adopted, and we all learn a bunch of new names. So with that, what is the future of outsourcing? Logically, you'd start with the idea that what are the big changes in technology on the road ahead? And right now, the number one thing on the road ahead, the thing that is just jumping out at us, is something called robotic process automation. Robotic process automation, or RPA, is software that operates at the presentation layer within an IT stack. So you've got the stack is the hardware, the operating system, the database, the applications, and finally the presentation layer where generally a human sits. But with RPA, software sits there and can work at digital speeds and with digital accuracy. Probably every company in the room is working on RPA today, and certainly for years now, every one of the major outsourcers has been working on automating services with RPA. A little further down the road is artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is not the quick win of RPA where you're replacing an existing person with software that does something like it that you can even call a bot. Artificial intelligence will require vastly more investment. We are seeing the start today with chatbots replacing, for example, a chatbot replacing a call center worker, or predictive analytics replacing a data center expert who previously would be working on problems like how much more capacity will we need next year. AI with a tremendous amount of investment will deliver an extraordinary return over the coming years. Rebecca Eisner, later today in our second to the last presentation, will describe the changes ahead for artificial intelligence. And then further in the future, almost hard to read in this typeface, are blockchain and distributed ledgers. One of the great sources of inefficiency in our entire economy is that every company is maintaining its own ledger of every transaction. There's tremendous opportunities if the companies work together to create blockchains and shared distributed ledgers to replace all of that inefficiency, all of that multiple record keeping with single record keeping. But that may require even more investment. People say blockchain today is where the internet was in 1995. And with that, we believe that what we will see is a new lane on the outsourcing highway. And that new lane will be digital services. Digital outsourcing will be a custom, made for you, works in your business service that's also automated and thus has the speed and efficiency and low cost of automation. And in this lane, the services are delivered by machines, they're automated. And the people are in the background. There are people who there are new jobs like you might have heard of bot manager, people who do exception handling, people who do configuration, and so forth. We don't think that all the other lanes are going away. We're hearing, for example, that robotic process automation could replace, say, a third of the low-skill workers within an offshore center. But we do believe that there will be tremendous growth in digital outsourcing. So the question now is, what does it take to change lanes to digital outsourcing? What do we as outsourcing lawyers do to build the contractual infrastructure to change lanes to digital outsourcing? The thing that we've realized over a few years of starting to see these deals is that this is not a simple add an addendum to your existing contract, and it's not a straightforward change. Actually, the differences are pervasive. And to think about this, and I don't think we can describe in this presentation all the differences, but I'm hoping I can leave you with an idea of how to think about the challenge ahead on the digital outsourcing lane. And imagine for a moment that you've called your share ride and the driverless car of the future pulls up, and you sit down and you're looking at a screen something like this. There's no driver, there's no wheel, there's no gas pedal, there's not even a brake. What there is a screen where you can describe what it is that you want. Now, before you have an outsourcing agreement like that, you have to say, what would I need in my contract before I'm willing to make that my new ride? Let's take a few examples. Transition can no longer be effective knowledge transfer because there's no driver to transfer the knowledge to. Instead, transition needs to involve testing and acceptance of the automations. Scope can no longer be role descriptions for the people who are doing the work. Scope instead needs to be a description of the specific outputs, the specific outcomes, and the specific activities to be completed. Service levels Service levels are often just a proxy for how good the people are. Service levels are, for example, accuracy, timeliness. Those are easy for the bots. And if you think about accuracy within the context of artificial intelligence, you might wonder how you would even measure that, because as Rebecca will describe later today, it's a bit of a black box. Instead, you need service levels that describe how quickly exceptions are handled, service levels that describe how well the system provides the outcomes that your company is looking for. And perhaps moving more toward a services partnership idea where the goal is to grow the business. Pricing. Pricing, of course, can no longer be based on FTEs because the FTEs aren't delivering the service. Pricing will need to be based on probably a per-click charge for the activities, the outcomes, and the outputs that are being produced by the digital system. This isn't actually the way a digital outsourcing arrangement would look. There are, of course, people in the background. And the people in the background are the bot managers who are reconfiguring the bots as needs change, the exception handlers who are fixing the problems that the bots can't handle, and the people who are speaking to you as customers and making sure that this is a custom, made-for-you service. We still need the personnel provisions that say that there will be adequate numbers of reasonably well-trained and qualified and skilled people who've been adequately drug tested and so forth. But this is also not a, we do what we do and our promise is it'll be available sort of cloud deal. Instead, we seem to be heading a bit more toward this idea of services partnership or a coactive arrangement, where you'll need to talk to these people about what happens next. And you'll need to be perhaps more connected in this new digital outsourcing lane, because the best model, the greatest amount of advantage, is having the digital outsourcing provider work as an integrator and an orchestrator of customer systems, supplier systems, third-party clouds, and data and digital assets. And working through that integration, orchestration, and automation to produce outputs and services that you might need. So if you have a deep connection, you will need to have a deep connection to the people. And one of the traditional assumptions that we've made in onshore outsourcing and offshore outsourcing is that we've turned over a function and we as customers have very few obligations under the contracts because we've turned over a discrete function. That may need to change in digital outsourcing because of the deep integration. We've also assumed that change control only needs to work on the relatively large changes because the people will adapt. If you, for example, you've outsourced finance and accounting to an outside service provider in India, and you upgrade your system and the boxes move around and the colors change and so forth, you might not be worried at all because the people will simply adapt. It's like having a driver in a share ride. The driver will simply adapt. But change control might be a much tighter and more interactive approach when the service provider is providing a digital or automated custom service. No presentation on outsourcing would be complete without at least a slide on data security. How does data security change? Well, of course, you still have the same laws, the same problems, but you have, I think, a new problem. Not only do you have the problem that there might be corrupted people who are subject to phishing attacks and their own problems, but you've got bots. And if the bot is corrupted, the bot, unlike the person, remembers every passcode it's ever seen. And it can remember all the data it's ever seen. And it can work really, really, really fast. So this is potentially a much larger data security problem. Another problem in digital outsourcing is just the amount of construction around the legal infrastructure and the legal ideas. And one example is that the laws themselves really haven't caught up to where we are. If you talk to almost anybody today, you say, the most valuable asset is data. Data is key, data is king. The data has gone from being a little thing that, digital exhaust or something that applications work with to being the canonical structure that applications are built around. And yet, data has almost no protection under the intellectual property laws in the United States. And so, your digital outsourcing contracts must be very focused on the protection of data and the allocation of rights in data. It's not enough to say that customer will own all intellectual property rights in the materials produced by outsourcer, because there may be no intellectual property rights. The Copyright Office has been very clear that copyright applies to creations by humans. There's another topic on this that, well, you could blame the Copyright Office, the laws are behind. Chances are you're behind too. Later today, Dan Mazur will give a presentation called The Big Data Paradox, where he'll talk about the challenge that companies are having with keeping up with the fact that data has become incredibly important, and you have agreements that are simply not built for this new age. And one of the examples we're seeing is if you've got a user-based agreement, and now you move to having bots, one possibility is that the bots aren't allowed to use it at all because they're not humans and the contract requires them to be a human. Another possibility is the bot is considered the extension of every human who touches the bot, like all of your customers, and that can become expensive, of course. Exit rights will also need to change. Remember that picture of the deeply integrated structure. In onshore outsourcing, the original concept was if you terminate, what you do is you buy back the system. You buy back the data center, the machines, you get the software licenses, the subcontracts, you just run it yourself or have someone else do it. Well, that doesn't work because in this almost no-shoring approach, there's really nothing to buy back. In offshore, you could take the procedures manual and hand it to the new team. Well, that's pretty good, except that here there's no procedures manual. So we will need to do some construction ourselves on the question of how to do exit rights and how to move from one very custom automated service to another very custom automated service. Our sense is that digital outsourcing is truly a new lane on the outsourcing highway and truly requires new thinking and new consideration of what to do. And so the question might be, well, based on that, if you believe me so far, where do you go next? The thing to do next, if you see this as the future, is investing. Invest in understanding the digital outsourcing model. You know, to the extent that these technologies are new, this conference, other conferences, savvy up on the technology ahead and the digital outsourcing model. Second, see what you can do to change your sourcing models to adapt to this new digital outsourcing model. And from the legal standpoint, that's certainly going to involve updating your forms, updating your best practices, updating your policies, so the digital outsourcing model is considered as another lane. It's not that you throw away the old book, it's that you add one more lane. And then consider investing more, as has happened with every other lane. You've needed to invest more in the initial stages of getting it right at the start. Invest more in deal structuring. Invest more in negotiation. Invest more in governance until you understand this new deal structure better. Now you might say, well, I don't have a deal on the table. I'm not worried about that. But the other thing you can do right now is that right now there are service providers at all of your companies who are already adopting digital outsourcing. They are gaining the benefits of digital outsourcing, and they are placing upon your companies the risks of digital outsourcing without the contractual protections that you ought to have. In many cases, those steps, those changes, would violate the change control provisions within the agreement. In many cases, there are opportunities to meet with existing service providers and say, hey, I'm ready to move to the digital outsourcing lane. Let's talk about ways that I can give you a new scope and allow you to use some of the new technology you're excited about. And that means that you can work with the contracts you have today, even if you're perfectly happy with those, and improve the value and the performance of those contracts. So with those investments, we believe that your company will be able to maximize value and avoid costly pitfalls in this new digital outsourcing lane. Thank you very much.